They invented traffic rules, they invented planning legislation, they had running water and public lavatories, and if anyone thinks that's trivial, I suspect you ought to imagine.
So I'll stop it there so we could talk a little bit about us. She keeps referring to us and the complexity of the Roman civilization compared to the relative simplicity of Athens. And she wins, by the way. So if you've looked at this ahead of time, you'll know that when they tally the votes, the way this system works is they have everybody vote before the debate starts, and then they tally them again afterwards, and they look at the greatest change, because the assumption is, well, that's going to indicate who has been most persuasive and moved the vote one way or the other. By the way, when we have our debates in town with the debate team, that's the same system that they use, and seeing who won. And there's I think another competition coming up soon.
Really? Civil debate versus Cornell.
Yes. Yep. And that's always interesting. I think the tickets are $20 a piece now, unless you're a student. I don't know.
Yeah, students $10, I think.
But we're looking at John Dewey and democratic habits of thought and action. And when we think of Dewey, we talked about James and Charles Sanders Peirce last time, and those were the first set of pragmatists that I talked about. John Dewey is also a pragmatist, although he also referred to himself as an instrumentalist. But he's tied in with the whole concept of a democracy. So the focus on the debate between them wasn't really just on democracy. It was which culture had more impact on us, right? And of course, they're thinking, especially of Britain at the time, which was really just a couple of years ago, while Boris was still the mayor of London. He's no longer the mayor of London. He's now the head of their Brexit committee. So he's involved in the negotiations in Brussels over how they're going to be able to exit the EU if they do. I'm not sure that it will now because of all the tension over that. In any case, democracy is a focus really for Dewey, so that's where I was going to go, and especially on education, where Dewey had his impact was primarily on the influence of education. Remember, James was a psychologist, Peirce was a mathematician and logician, and really working on the theory of signs, the meaning of language, the semiotic. But Dewey was primarily interested in education, and in his teaching and writing books focused on education. Let me notice he's born in 1859, so of those three, he's the youngest. Died in 1952, which was after World War II was over. So, and a year after I was born, actually. So I don't know how you figure out how you remember dates, but of course, comparing your own dates to them certainly helps. But he's primarily interested in education. And the reason for it is if we look at how philosophy has evolved, remember the argument I had that American philosophy is primarily Hegelian philosophy. The Europeans went existentialism, the Eastern Europeans, Asians went communism. But if you're looking for where Hegel's philosophy really continued as it was in its completeness, it went to the United States. We basically see that in John Dewey, who was really the one that brought that forward, who was a Hegelian. He studied Hegel in college, and he basically translated Hegel from a kind of a miserable English interpretation of Hegel's work into a new kind of more convenient language for Americans. I referred to it as removing the Hegelian garb, which garb is clothing, right? So he took it out of the Hegelian garb and put it into good American language. We don't even use that anymore. He talked about organic structures, for example, instead of spirit. So the German concept of the cultural, the Geist, which how many of you ever used any of those expressions? Weltgeist, Zeitgeist. Do you use any of those anymore?
Yeah.
Yes?
Did you just say poltergeist?
Yeah, that counts.
Well, that is the German word, yes, but not one that Hegel used to use. But yeah, because he was talking about Geist as mind, as culture, and in a sense, it's the way you think, right? The way the society thinks, the way God thinks, right? The spirit of the times, in English, the Geist, the Zeitgeist, right? Is, you know, what motivates artists, what motivates the music we listen to, why is some guy in Tennessee shooting up the Waffle House and blaming what's her name? She sings Romeo and Juliet, Taylor Swift?
Love story.
Yeah,
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. Why on earth did he blame Taylor Swift for stalking him? You familiar with that?
He stalked her 3 years prior, I think it was.
There's a psychological a condition where people have issues with projecting. They do something, but they accuse the person that they're doing that thing to of doing what they're doing to them. Does that make sense?
And breaking news out of Antioch, Tennessee. Moments ago, police tweeted a picture of the accused Waffle House shooter in custody. NBC's Maya Rodriguez.
Is he missing an arm?
Pardon?
No,
It
he's
looks
cut.
like he's missing.
He's handcuffed.
I know he's. Oh, yeah.
But
But like,
But he claimed that Taylor Swift had been stalking him. Which is like, what? Why would that be ever?
she's a creep.
Yeah, that's definitely how things happen.
Yeah. That's how she finds new boyfriends.
Oh, makes a song about him after she breaks up with him.
Yeah, she just stalks them.
See, this is her entire commercial ploy. If she goes stalk someone, figures out everything, dates them, breaks up with them, makes a song about it.
That's her modus operandi. Huh?
Yep.
Well, in any case, sorry.
It's
I'm
just
glad he's safe.
Safe.
Did he hurt anybody? Did anybody get hurt?
Yeah, he killed
So wait,
killed
Yeah, he
four
killed
four in the
He
Waffle
killed
House.
four.
Others were injured.
So wait, how is he blaming his shooting of the Waffle House?
I'm not sure that he is, but he at least at one point claimed that she was stalking him.
Yeah, no, but he
Cute.
stalked.
The Beatles almost caused racial war.
What?
How is this?
Charles Manson. He
Oh,
heard,
Charles.
you heard the Beatles telling him to start a war, and then I forgot what it was.
Hitler
Helter Skelter.
Hitler loved Wagner's operas and wanted to destroy the world because he couldn't get the trees right. Sorry, that's Eddie Izzard.
They're the Nazi people.
So Geist, the German concept. Dewey changed that and made it much more kind of evolutionary theory. One of the quiz questions I asked you was, do you think of yourself, your own culture, your own philosophy as pragmatism? And some of you said no. I thought that was kind of interesting. Some of you said no. I got the impression that one of the reasons for that was because of the evolution aspect of it. If you don't believe in evolution, you might not like the idea that pragmatism accepts evolution as one of the main characteristics. Let me go to my notes.
What type of evolution?
There's always time for brunch.
Who's doing
Take the
that?
wall off.
Huh?
I'm just gonna take the wall off. Like I'm feeling it flex.
No, I know. It
Yeah.
keeps like whistling
here you
against
go.
it.
So here's
Before you got here, the light was flickering.
The moment you guys, the lights are like, wow, like that.
yeah, they predicted up to like 80 miles an
Mhm.
hour or something.
Yeah.
It sent my truck from one lane, half lane to another. Like,
That's
like,
nice.
Over.
like a side, like a perpendicular gut.
It was hard before.
Right by the way station. It was bad.
Just go outside, just
Just in the middle of the
and then
road,
fly
too.
away.
Yeah, walking in here.
Save energy, right?
You know, just go outside, face into the wind, open your jacket.
Solve global
How,
warming.
how come on days like this we don't see any of those hand gliders up over the mountain? That would be.
Probably because I feel like that's
Oh my God,
very
they would
Be able to
dangerous.
land that thing, man.
You don't land that at 80 miles per hour.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm always amazed that I don't read in the paper who died, the day before flying one of those.
I know people.
They have
People.
experience. They know what they're doing.
I don't know.
It's like hanging.
Oh, they're hand gliders. They jump off of the.
Base jumping.
Oh,
beach
the
gliders.
non-powered anglers.
Yeah, they hop off there and then they can just kind of cruise
That's the
around for a
issues,
while.
man, that
They use
wind
the thermals.
or
There's,
either getting
some of
wind.
them actually make it all the way out to the valley. They have like groups of them that come cruise and see how far they can get using the thermals.
Well,
Yeah.
so these are, I don't know if I showed you these when I was talking about James and Charles Sanders Peirce, but so this is a paragraph from a book by, it's called The Metaphysical Club, and it's about the four different pragmatists that I've kind of highlighted. But during the late 19th century, etc., key figures, you read that if you're interested.
Okay.
Pragmatism.
Oh. Slow reader.
Oh, okay. So I'll read it. So during the late 19th century and the early 20th century, there was an outburst and flourishing of philosophic activity in America. The key figures drew upon a variety of European orientations, British empiricism, Kant, Hegel, but an important group emerged which included Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, John Dewey, and George Herbert Mead. Although there were sharp differences in their intellectual backgrounds, philosophic temperaments, training, and interests, nevertheless there were also sufficient family resemblances so that they, as well as others, began to think of themselves as constituting a distinctive philosophic movement. William James, a gifted stylist and an immensely popular lecturer, that doesn't mean that he did his hair really well. It was the way he delivered his speeches, that's the style. And an immensely popular lecturer labeled the movement pragmatism and acknowledged Peirce as its founder. Sometimes it is said that pragmatism was born from James' misunderstanding of Peirce. Peirce was so outraged by James' popularization that he renamed his own doctrine pragmaticism, a name ugly enough to be safe from kidnappers. Actually, they were good friends, so it's not. So what does pragmatism mean? It comes from the Greek, that which has been done. It's similar to the Latin res, or thing. And Kant used it as a relation to some definite human purpose. Peirce refers to it as how knowledge is related to human action, and I talked about that. And and he
Wow,
created
Pierce.
a behavioral semiotic. So associating the meaning of words with what people actually do in conjunction with their uttering those words. And the semiotic is a theory of signs. The word's meaning is its use, meaning, logic, rhetoric. And the pragmatic maxim, meaning is the connection between action and experience. So we talked about Peirce. I give you here a few bullets about Peirce, and then about James. But today we're going to look at John Dewey. So John Dewey, born 1859, dies 1952. Burlington, Vermont. If you're familiar with Burlington, Vermont.
No, Burlington back.
Vermont College is up there. Middlebury College is near there also. Middlebury, Vermont. He gets his Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Vermont in 1879. Remember, that's, 15 years after the Civil War ended. Gets his PhD degree from Johns Hopkins University in 1884. Keep in mind that was when Charles Sanders Peirce was there. It was a few years after Josiah Royce got his PhD there. From there, he goes to the University of Michigan and teaches right away. And it's kind of amazing, because when he said that he wanted to be a philosophy major and get his PhD in philosophy, his advisors told him not to, because the only way he would be able to get a job is if he was also a minister, and he wasn't interested in the ministry. Because up until then, it was pretty common for anyone to be a professor in philosophy to also be a minister. So it was expected that you would do both, right?
Just for the sheer volume of reading that you do on a regular, the amount of dedication they have to literature.
Well, the tradition of the American university system was primarily for religious purposes. The goal of the early creation of universities was to produce ministers for their communities, so that they don't have to import all the ministers for the churches. So yeah, the center of the university would be the chapel. Remember, Thomas Jefferson was the revolutionary that put the library at the center at the University of Virginia. Kind of interesting. Although it still almost looks like a chapel at the center, if you've ever seen that one.
Bed in the middle of the doorway too.
Pardon?
He put his bed in the middle of the doorway too.
It was in between two rooms. Yeah. So if he rolled out of the bed one way, he was in one room, and he rolled out the other, he was in the other. And above, he had a storage space. Pretty interesting.
Person or
Habit.
Thomas Jefferson? It was creativity. He constantly kept remodeling his house, which is one of the reasons why he was broke, even when he, never made up enough money to pay for all of his finagling with Michelle. But so, nonetheless, even though he was advised not to get a degree unless he was also going to be a minister, he ended up right away being hired at the University of Michigan, never had a problem, was never out of work, always employed. And the whole American university system shifted from the ministry to a secular point of view. If you're interested in that, I think it was... interested, there's a book called The Soul of the American University,
Oh, that was expensive.
From Protestant Establishment to Established Non-Belief. And it's basically a history of the university system in America as it moves from universities primarily made to create ministers to, of course, what we have today, where actually very few universities have seminaries anymore. A lot of universities have religion departments, but most typically have a philosophy department that also deals with religion, as we do. For example, we have Kristen Hansen, who's she has her PhD in the philosophy of religion, and she's the one that would do our Western religion and Eastern religion courses as part of our philosophy department. But you still would take philosophy as a preparatory study to going to seminary, for example. So Dewey ends up at all these different universities. There's interesting reasons why he moved from them. Michigan was where he got his start. Then he went to the University of Minnesota for a few years, but notice almost immediately he goes back to Michigan, and that was because the chair of the philosophy department died, and he was invited to come back as the new chair. Then he goes to the University of Chicago, and that's where he did most of his work on education. This is also where he created the laboratory school or the activity school. What time are we supposed to go to?
You got 15 minutes.
So we've got 15 minutes. Let me see if I can find.
To parent-teacher meetings goes many a bewildered Olsen.
Now hold on, Miss Fox. It's all very well to teach my boy to paint pretty pictures and build a birdhouse.